right. Sarah Hurwitz, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see
Right.
you, Mandy.
So the how you doing question, you're not supposed to ask that anymore because it's really hard to answer, you know?
I
What,
know. It
what do
is
you
really,
say?
because like personally I'm doing great.
Yeah,
I'm lucky, I'm privileged, but man,
yeah,
devastated and heartbroken would
yes.
be
And of
how I
course,
feel in general.
how we're doing is like a combination of like how we're doing and like how the world is doing around us. And the world around us, depending on where you are, is really not good. So I really appreciate the
Nope.
time right now.
Thank you.
I'm a little nervous talking to you. You're the wordsmith. You're the word maker, and I'm talking to you using words. So I'm going to try to be very eloquent and articulate, and use lots of great language for one of the most famous speechwriters in American politics, Sarah
Fair.
Hurwitz. But first, before we start, I just want to welcome everyone to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. I'm Manny Akutiel, and we have a small business that hosts civic gatherings. And we had to shut down, obviously, because of the shelter-in-place order. And so we've moved our civic programming online, and we're very, very lucky to have Sarah Hurwitz, who was Hillary Clinton's speechwriter for her 2008 presidential campaign, and then was Michelle Obama and President Barack Obama's speechwriters. You were in President Obama's speechwriting team, and then you became Michelle Obama's senior speechwriter. And we're going to talk about your time in the White House and writing for the Obamas, and then also about a new book that you just came out with, which I'm super excited about. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, so first let's just go chronologically. What was it like being the head speechwriter? Was there like one memory in particular that sticks out for being the head speechwriter for Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign? And how'd you get that
Man.
job?
Yeah, I applied for it. I had been a speechwriter on other presidential campaigns previously, and it was so intense because just she was giving so many speeches, and I just remember at one point during the campaign, I dropped a glass in my kitchen, and I just was working on so many speeches and so overwhelmed that I didn't clean it up for about 3 weeks. Like I
What?
just couldn't get it together to do that, so I just wore flip-flops in my kitchen, which is
No.
not. Yeah, for real. And she is an extraordinary woman. She's someone of such depth and substance and heart. It was an honor to work for her. A total honor.
So that was 2008. And then what did you do between that campaign and the White House?
So I was between that campaign in the White House. I actually went straight from the Hillary campaign to the Obama campaign. They hired me, and I was actually working for then Senator Obama, but I helped Mrs. Obama with her 2008 Democratic National Convention speech.
Yes.
And when he won, then I got to go to the White House and work for him. But I sort of missed working for her. So after a couple of years, I actually switched over to be her head speechwriter.
Was that a hard decision to make?
It was in some ways in that I think my colleagues were a little bit confused. People don't usually go from the West Wing to the First Lady's office. It's usually the other way around.
Yeah.
I think President Obama might also have been a little bit confused.
Yeah.
But I felt so much more at home in her voice, and
Yeah.
I just was so much more interested in the issues she was writing about. So it just felt in the end it was the right decision.
Tell me about that. What makes a good speechwriter principal pairing? Like tell me if you're the Yenta and you're matchmaking a speechwriter and a famous world leader politician, i.e. people you work for, what makes a good pairing?
So I think the most important thing is you have to share a sensibility about what makes a good speech. I think that I really share Mrs. Obama's sensibility that a good speech is about touching people's hearts. It's about articulating whatever the beating heart truth is of an issue, even if that truth is uncomfortable or edgy or awkward. Mrs. Obama really was always asking herself, like, what is the deepest, most important truth I can tell at this particular moment? And she loved telling stories. She loved painting images. So I think sharing that sensibility was really important.
Well, actually, before we go forward, I'm sorry, I want to take one step back and just ask, like, how did you get into speechwriting? Like, how did you know it was for her? It just seems like a pretty niche thing to do. I mean, a lot of us watch The West Wing, and so I think we're familiar with certain speechwriting archetypes, but like, how did you get into speechwriting in the first place?
Yeah, so I actually interned in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office in the summer of '98. And the writers I worked for helped me get my first 2 jobs in speechwriting. One was a junior job as an assistant, one was a speechwriter for U.S. Senator. They were both failures. I didn't know how to write. speeches back then. I didn't have any training. So I ended up going to law school thinking I'll never write speeches again. I met a guy there named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a Democratic congressman, but back then he was a classmate and he'd previously been a writer for President Clinton. And we just started freelancing together and we got jobs on Wes Clark's campaign and John Kerry's campaign. And he really taught me like how you write to be heard rather than read, which are two very different skills. So I was super lucky.
How to write to be heard rather than read. Well, I know this is probably like the core of what you did, but what are the differences between writing a speech to be heard rather than read?
Yeah, good question. So a few, okay, I'm just going to stop right now. I just said something like, yeah, period, good question, period. Okay, I'm good. Like, I just articulated several sentence fragments. That wasn't grammatical. And you weren't sitting there thinking like, oh, her grammar is awful. I mean, where was the subject and object, right? You know, spoken language is much looser. It's more colloquial. It's informal. Whereas written language really needs to conform to the rules of grammar. It needs to use proper punctuation. So, you know, oftentimes if you're writing something that's really meant to be read and you read it out loud, it can feel a little stilted and awkward. Writing to be heard is much more conversational, much less grammatical.
Right. Oh, I should say for the folks who are tuning in, if you have questions for Sarah, you can just type them into the Q&A box now. You don't have to wait till our question and answer session, which is going to be in about 10, 15 minutes. So feel free to just type in your questions now and we'll answer them as, you know, once we open that up. Okay. I want to talk about President Obama, then Michelle Obama, then I want to get to your book.
All right.
What was a speech you worked on for President Obama that you were particularly proud of? And is there, that's the first question about that. Was there a speech that you worked on for President Obama that you're particularly proud of?
You know, it's funny. This is kind of an unexpected answer, but, you know, this was not necessarily the most, you know, it's not a particularly publicly known or acclaimed speech, but one of the White House butlers passed away when I was, you know, early in the White House, and I wrote the eulogy that President Obama delivered for him. And I felt, you know, I didn't get media attention, but I really felt a sense of pride in honoring the man who had served there for so many decades, just had an extraordinary history there. And so I felt a real sense that I honored him, and the staff, I think, really appreciated that respect that President Obama showed him. So that's one I'm proud of.
Okay, just between us chickens, what was he like to work with?
He is delightful. He is the calmest, most unflappable person I have ever met. He is gracious. He is warm. Like, I found him to be totally lovely.
But like a speech giver, like, was he like, did he like send you back with a ton of notes each time? And like, did you put in all this work and he just said something completely different?
Sometimes, you know, I mean, for big speeches especially, and I didn't do his biggest speeches, right? I wasn't like the head speechwriter for him, but, you know, he would sometimes write out long form in handwriting, just pages and pages of the speech. He would just write it out on yellow legal pads and like hand it to his speechwriters. There's actually a great White House photograph, one of the official photographs, that shows a page of a speech covered in his handwritten edits, just covered. Every sentence, every line is covered. So he really very engaged. He's basically his best speechwriter, but doesn't have time to do it. So the rest of us kind of just tried to keep up.
Got it. And how does that compare to how Michelle Obama was as someone to write speeches for? How are they different?
Very, very similar, actually.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, she is someone who knows who she is, and she always knows what she wants to say. So, like, I would just sit down with her and be like, what do you want to say in this speech? And she would dictate all of this language that I would quickly type up. And I would try to type it up verbatim. And that was really the beating heart of the speech. And she would just edit and edit and edit, you know, many, many rounds of edits.
Okay, I have a Michelle Obama story for you.
Yeah.
I think it was this past Labor Day. I was supposed to visit a friend in Montana, but he flaked on me and I decided to go anyway to Montana. And so I rented this car and I drove throughout the whole state, and I went to a rodeo and I went to a bunch of small towns. And I got Becoming on audiobook, which I don't normally do, but since I was in the car, I wanted it, and I was alone, I wanted someone's voice to comfort me, and what better voice to comfort me than the First Lady?
Good choice.
So I want you to picture this gay boy is on a rural road in Montana, fully sobbing, just completely losing it, as Michelle Obama talks to me about falling in love with Barack Obama, and it just really, really touched my heart. And I feel like that book, I know it wasn't a speech, but I just feel like you spent a lot of time with her, and you know her, and you got to work for her, which is such an honor. And I just feel like now with that book, so much of the American public feels like they know her too.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, she shared so much of herself in that book. It's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about this, and I bet you get asked about this a million times, but when they go low, we go high. You wrote that speech.
No, that line, that was her line. She actually came up with that line. Yes, I wrote the speech, but she came up with that line.
Okay, so what's the story about that line? I was there. I was in the convention hall in Philadelphia when she delivered it. I got the chills. Tell me about the speech, the story of it, and the line that was so famous.
It's really funny. She had such a clear idea of what she wanted to do with that speech. She was like, I want it to be centered around our children and how Hillary is the best candidate to ensure the future of our children. She just like laid out this clear vision. And I actually really struggled to write it for some reason. Like I was just struggling. I couldn't quite put it together. It was like, it had just really come. And finally, at like 2 a.m, a week and a half before the speech, like I figured out how to kind of piece together what she wanted and how to structure it. Yeah. And, she so many rounds of edits, and it's kind of funny.
Do you remember how many rounds? Like,
oh God, I don't even know. Dozens, probably.
Dozens?
Yeah, probably.
Dozens?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's not unusual for a big speech like that. Yeah, it's not unusual. And it's kind of funny, like when I was, before the day before the speech, I thought like, okay, this is pretty solid. Feels like a good speech. I think we're in good shape. I wasn't feeling like, oh, this is going to be historic. But, the way she delivered it, the moment in which it was delivered, it just, I was there, and it was extraordinary.
I mean, it's become a meme, you know what I mean? Like people say when they go low, we go high, or when they go low, we go low. There's just like, it's become its own part of the lexicon. So,
and by the way, a lot of people are like, well, is that still true in this media environment, in this era? Like really, when they go low, we go high. That's kind of like,
what do you think?
And like, I disagree. I actually think it is still the way to go. I mean, think about the people who've broken through in the last few years, the Parkland, Florida kids, Greta Thunberg, like these were people like Cuomo. It's like, these are people who are going high, and going high doesn't mean going easy on people. It doesn't mean being nice. You can be fierce and tough and strong, but it means treating people with dignity. It means speaking through a lens of love. So I think it absolutely still works. And I think it's actually the only thing that really works.
Totally. I'm really proud of it. I'm proud that came out of the mouth of a Democrat, because I think it so much says also what we stand for as Democrats and what we're about. And also to look back how we want to be remembered as Democrats. This is my last question on the speechwriting side, which is, what do you think makes an effective speech?
I think an effective speech is one that tells a really deep and timely truth, is one that just says something that's profoundly true. I mean, that's just, if you think of the great speeches, it's like they just said something that was really deeply true. And I think also a really good speech, it's spoken in an authentic way, right? There's so much kind of crappy speech writing out there about like middle-class families in the middle of my priorities, just these weird poll-tested soundbite lines that they're not memorable, they're not real, they're very fake. I think that authenticity, that speaking truth in a true voice, I think it really, that's what makes for a great speech.
Okay, so we're gonna just totally shift gears now, because this is a conversation about your time as a speechwriter. And for those who have questions, we're gonna get to questions in about 7 or 8 minutes. But you recently wrote a book, and it's about your path to finding your Jewish spirituality. And you and I bonded a lot about this because we're both spiritual Jews. And that's important to us, and it's core to us. And so I wanted to ask you, how did you decide to write a book about your own Jewish journey? And as much as you can, if you can summarize kind of like, what is the book about, and also what Jews or non-Jews can take from it?
Yeah, I grew up with very little Jewish background, like services I thought were boring, Hebrew school that I didn't love. Yeah. I basically disengaged for 25 years. Yeah. At the age of 36, I randomly went through a breakup, was looking to fill my time, happened to just take an intro to Judaism class just to fill time. Yeah. And I was blown away by what I found. I would say my book is basically, it is a love letter to Judaism. And from someone who is a, skeptical kind of resistant kind of person, what I
Yeah.
found was so much wisdom about how to be a good person, how to lead a worthy life, and how to find profound adult spiritual connection,
Yeah.
right? Not like God is a man in the sky who punishes you when you're naughty. Like, I think,
Right.
most of us don't believe that. Many of
Right.
us don't believe that, but really adult spiritual connection. And I just found so much wisdom and beauty in Judaism that I was so surprised by and so moved by, and I wanted to share it with people.
And how do you think the book will be read by and integrated by Jews versus non-Jews?
It's funny. I've been amazed at the just how people from such diverse backgrounds have found this book moving. I
Yeah.
think non-Jews have said to me, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know all these things about Jewish ethics. Like that's actually useful for me." Like
Yeah.
there's a whole section about speech. Jewish law is obsessed with how we use our speech. Do we
Yes.
shame people? Do we gossip? Right? They're like,
Uh,
that's not something that's only for Jews, right? Everyone can benefit from that. Just as I've benefited from many traditions, learning about other faith traditions. I also think a lot of non-Jews have been really moved by the God chapter, which articulates all these different Jewish conceptions of the divine. And I think Jews especially as well, because we don't necessarily talk a lot about God in Judaism, in our, it's not something that's just, we just discuss it less, I think, than others do. And for people to realize actually there are all these authentic, deeply Jewish, different concepts of the divine that many people find very moving. So that I think that's it's being received by such a diversity, and also by Jews who are very, very observant and traditional have told me that it was meaningful to them, and
right.
Jews like me who are totally disengaged have found it meaningful.
You're right. About the speech thing. I still, because there's a lot of prohibitions against what's called false talk or gossip. Basically, it's called lashon hara, as you know. And I just
Yeah.
remember growing up and learning about how you basically became a leper if you gossiped about someone. You'd be banished from the camps, and you'd have like a white spot on you, and it was a whole thing. And now, when I find myself wanting to gossip, for some reason, it's just been trained into me. I think about leprosy, and I'm like, well, I don't want to become a leper, so I'm going to hold my tongue. And it is kind of integrated into us.
Yes, I feel it too. Like there are so many times a day where I'll pause before saying something and
Yeah.
just remember what I've learned and just the harm I can do. And look, I still mess it up way too many times a day. I'm not no saint, but it's like I mess it up 100 times a day instead of 120 times a day. So like
Yeah.
I feel like I'm getting better.
So I want to ask you about what it means to be a spiritual person in a particular dogmatic faith in 2020, because I sometimes feel like I am more comfortable outing myself as a gay man in a lot of circles than and I would consider myself a religious Jew, but also just like a spiritual person that believes in a faith, right? That ascribes to a faith. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about that and how if you see that yourself, and also where do you see this kind of going? What trends are you seeing?
Yeah, so I actually think that Judaism really isn't a dogmatic religion. I know there's some kind of minority sects of it that do interpret it that way, but I think overall, we have this incredible theological humility. There
Yeah.
is no Jewish creed or statement that God is X, right? I think we have the humility to say, like, we're
Yeah.
talking about something that is so beyond the
Mhm.
ability of our tiny little hearts and minds to articulate. So
Yeah.
for me, what I love about Judaism is it gives me all these different conceptions. There are the mystics who say that God is everything. You're God, I'm God. The idea that there's any barrier between us, that's an illusion.
Yeah.
It's like if you walk by a homeless person on the street, that person is God. It's a
Yeah.
manifestation of the divine, and you should treat that person accordingly, right?
Yeah.
That's not something a lot of us really internalize.
Yeah.
There's Martin Buber who says God is what arises in deep human relation between two people who are just fully contemplating each other's humanity. What arises between them is God. Mordecai Kaplan says God is the process by which we become our highest, truest selves. So for me, there's just so many, and none of these things is like an idol or a dogma or a creed. They're all just people articulating their snapshots of the divine, their sense, their feelings, their experience, and I relate to many of them. So for me, I actually think Judaism, it's very well suited to folks like me who are very resistant to a dogma. I'm very resistant to being told something implausible.
Right.
When people tell me, well, there's a being who controls everything and rewards and punishes, I'm like, okay, well, what about the Holocaust? Oh,
Yeah.
no. God didn't do the Holocaust. People did. Okay, well, so what is this all powerful being doing all day?
Right.
Well, it's very complicated and mysterious. It's like, guys, I'm not, don't put that on me, right?
Yeah.
That's not And fortunately, Judaism offers something I think richer and more complex.
But just to put a fine point on it, all the stuff you just talked about, they all seem, I'm totally with it, right? But they all kind of, like, what about that is, all those things are uniquely Jewish? Like, what makes,
Yeah.
like, God being that, like, strong relationship between people, I totally believe in, and I have felt God in that presence. But what makes someone a Jew? You know,
Yeah.
spiritually?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, what makes someone a Jew
What,
spiritually? It's so funny
maybe,
because we
maybe I'll
don't,
just say, what makes you a Jew spiritually?
yeah, you know, it's kind of funny because Judaism, I'm Jewish, whether or not I believe in anything spiritual or religious that's Jewish, right? I was born into a Jewish, you become Jewish either by being born into a Jewish family or by choosing to be Jewish through conversion.
Yeah.
And so there isn't like, for me, even if I don't have any faith or spirituality, like I'm still Jewish. But I
Yeah.
think what makes my spirituality Jewish is that it's very much grounded in ancient Jewish sources. It's grounded in Jewish thinkers who are well versed in those sources. So I
Yeah.
think it's like articulated in a Jewish language with Jewish sources. However, you can find mystical traditions in every faith, right? And they're very similar. So I would never say, oh, only Judaism has wisdom on spirituality. That's not true.
Yeah.
All of the world's religious traditions have wisdom and spiritual, imagination to offer us. And there are many similar ideas. So I certainly would never say that this is better than the other ones or that it's only Jews think that. That's just not true.
Okay, for the folks who are tuning in now, just so you know, you can type your questions in. This is my last question to Sarah Hurwitz, and then we'll get to your questions. So do type them into the Q&A box. We're going to bring it full circle. What did working for the Obamas teach you about spirituality and faith? Like, how did your interactions with them affect your own spirituality?
It's funny.
Not a lot of people get to, like, have that close connection to people like the Obamas. That's very special.
Yeah. To me, when I started studying Judaism, I came to realize that what they had been teaching me all these years in the White House was actually something that is a core Jewish idea, which is the idea that we're all created in the image of the divine, in the image of God. That's a verse from the Torah, which is our key holy book. And I don't care if you believe in God, don't believe in God, spiritual, not spiritual, it doesn't matter. What it means, as a rabbi named Yitz Greenberg beautifully put it, he said that means that each of us is infinitely worthy. We are all totally equal to each other, and each of us is unique with a unique world of possibility to offer. And that is, I think, the Obamas lived that truth every day in the way they treated people, in the careers that they had, right? Like they just lived and breathed that. So I think I was constantly reminded of that core truth by them.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I have so many more questions, but this is interactive. We want to get to the folks who are listening's questions. So Chelsea, you're first. How do you, Sarah, balance authenticity of the speaker and your own ideas in a speech?
Yeah. So, as a speechwriter, you are not there to script someone. You are there to channel them. So, that is just a fundamental difference. It's not about my ideas. If I have ideas and they are helpful to Mrs. Obama, if they were helpful to Mrs. Obama, if I shared them with her and she approved it, that's fine. Like, you can bring in your ideas if it's sort of complementing what the speaker wants, but your job really, it is to channel, it is to help her best use her voice, not for you to kind of impose your ideas or your voice.
Awesome.
Great question.
Yes, that was a great question, Chelsea.
And to add to that, people say, what happens if you disagree with the person you write for? And my answer is I don't. I don't write for people with whom I disagree on core fundamental values. That just isn't something that would be morally acceptable to me. So I write for people with whom I agree.
Got it. I feel like West Wing trains you for, like, the speechwriter is just being in complete battle with the president, like, in terms of, and there's this, like, fight, but it's probably not accurate. Okay, what was the hardest speech you had to write, and why?
I think it was probably, there are so many that were tough, but one was this commencement address that President Obama gave in 2009. It was his first commencement address. And literally, the economy was crashing. I'd given it to him a week in advance, didn't hear anything. The morning of the speech, he called me into the Oval Office and said, this isn't the speech I want to give. I want to give a totally different speech. So I spent, like, the entire day in my office frantically rewriting it, then in a helicopter rewriting it, and on a plane rewriting it, and in a motorcade rewriting it, and just feeling so panicky and frantic. He was totally calm, completely unflappable.
Oh my
I was
God.
like, and he's like, editing it, rewriting, redictating it. It was all, ideas that he articulated, but man, that was stressful. So that was a pretty hard speech to write.
That sounds really, really stressful.
It was very stressful for me, not for him. He was totally fine.
Diana wants to know, oftentimes when great political speeches are discussed, they're usually delivered by men. Aside from Michelle Obama, who's clearly in a league of her own, which I would totally agree with, do you have any other specific speeches by female leaders that stick out to you as particularly exceptional?
Yeah, I mean, I think Malala Yousafzai's, her address at the UN and many other speeches she's given, she is a stellar speaker. I think Hillary Clinton's, women's rights are human rights address that she gave in Beijing. I think like Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman speech. I mean, there are a lot of really extraordinary speeches given by women throughout history. And you're right, they don't get nearly as much attention as men. They're not what we first think of, but they are just as good as many of the best speeches by men.
Is the speech writing community also heavily dominated by men, or is there more gender parity?
It's funny, when I first started out, it was, right? I was the only woman speechwriter for most of my career until, the White House, when we did hire other women speechwriters, right? But at first it was just me, and then we beefed up, and by the end we were, 50-50.
Yeah.
But it has traditionally been pretty male dominated, and it's strange to me. It's not okay, and it's changing, thank goodness. So I think it's different now.
Someone named EC, though I imagine that's maybe an acronym or a nickname, asks, was there a word you avoided using in speeches at all costs? How did you write around it, or which alternative did you use? EC, interesting question.
That's a great question. I hate jargon. I hate it. So like the words like, so that's what any kind of policy jargon, I always avoided that because like no one knows what you're talking about. Yeah. Second, I hate words like utilize, leverage, platform, like utilize especially. That word should be banned.
Why? Why utilize? What's wrong with that?
It's so technocratic. Utilize, it's technocratic. It has too many syllables. It just say use, for the love of God. Yeah. Utilize is my least favorite speech word.
Okay, we have time for one or two more questions. RuPaul asks, and not RuPaul, well, maybe the RuPaul, but
that would be cool.
I don't think this is RuPaul. Is there a process you use to really try to embody and summon the voice of the principal? Basically, do you notice how you are able to cultivate the voice, sound like the principal, how they would say something in addition to what they would say? Yeah, like method.
Yeah. I mean, I think the process for that is by spending as much time as humanly possible with the principal. Like over the years, I spent so much time with Mrs. Obama in meetings, on the road, listening to her speak, and getting instructions and feedback from her. So, after a number of years, I would just hear her voice in my head, right? I would kind of hear her saying like, oh, this transition's a little sloppy, Sarah, or like, okay, we're getting lost in the weeds here. Where's the beating heart? And I could kind of just slip into her voice. It's just like, think of it, someone you know really, really well. If I said to you, give a 5-minute speech in that person's voice on X topic, you could do it because you kind of know how to imitate them. You kind of, you spent enough time with them. It's similar being someone's speechwriter.
Got it. And I just, in another life, I would have spent lots of time with Michelle Obama. Last question is from Irene. She's talking about the idea of navigating social complexity. She said that I got the feeling while reading the book that our Jewish laws regarding social requirements, like a minyan, is our special training for navigating society. What is your experience with Judaism as social training? And then she also mentions that her non-Jewish wife was amazed at how our bar mitzvah training early in our lives also works towards social stress reduction. So social training as it relates to Judaism.
Beautiful question. I think that, Judaism dictates a very high bar for how we treat others. Like in the secular world, it's like you do you as long as you don't hurt people. And Judaism actually says, no, you're actually really responsible for people in your community. So that, when someone is sick or in mourning, don't just send a text. You actually have to go physically visit them at the hospital. You have to go to the shiva, the funeral. You cannot do that now, right? But we can be present in that way to the extent we can through screens, deeply present. So I do think there is this real communal requirement to Judaism, and just, Jewish ethics are just the standards they hold us to for how we treat others are just so high. You're constantly thinking about, am I embarrassing this person? I mean, literally, there is an ancient Jewish law that says you can't ask a shopkeeper for the price of something or information on something if you have no intention of buying it, because it's actually unkind to them. It's wasting their time and it's getting their hopes up. What a kind law, right? Like, it's like you're really thinking of that person.
I remember learning that if you embarrass someone, it's akin to murder. And that's because of the blood that rushes to their face, it's considered murdering them. And so there are very, very strict laws against embarrassing, shaming someone in public.
Think about social media, man. I mean,
totally.
Lives violated every day. So it's really insightful and helpful.
We're almost at 5:30, but can I get to one or two more questions, Sarah? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course.
Mike Masserman, hello, Mike. How you doing?
Oh, hello.
Knowing the world would be completely different in August. If you were writing Michelle Obama's speech for the DNC, what would you want the message to be?
Oh my gosh, what a beautiful question. I think I would really want her to be celebrating the courage of the American people, the decency. I would want her to be highlighting the incredible heroism that we are seeing on everywhere in our country from people, right? Yeah. From medical professionals, from everyone who works in a hospital, every staffer, every medical professional, from everyone working at a grocery store, transit worker. Like, I would really want her to honor the stories of people who kept us safe and kept our country running. You know, and I would also want her to honor our grief and to speak about what we have lost, the catastrophic tragedy that we are unfortunately going to see unfold. I would want her to be honoring those who we've loved and lost. I think those two things are really important. And I would want her to talk about how the lessons of this time are going to lead us forward into a different time. But man, it's a heartbreaking thing to think about, because, you know, it feels like this is so devastating right now, right? Yeah. This is unbearable and intolerable right now, and we're still kind of at the beginning, and that's very hard to fathom.
The last question is, there's a couple questions just kind of about what's next for you. Like, what are you thinking next? You just wrote an amazing book, and we're going to send everyone that's tuned in a link to purchase the book. I have the book. It's amazing. What's next for you, Sarah? What are you working on, and where do you see your future going?
Yeah, you know, I would love to write another book. I'd love to focus on God and spirituality, because I think I tend to write the book I wish I had, and I kind of wish I had a book about God and spirituality that was for someone like me who's kind of, you know, a little bit skeptical, but also spiritual and has spiritual yearnings and longings, but is resistant to dogma and is resistant to things that are implausible. So I wish that book existed. So I'm like, all right, I would learn a lot from writing it. So we'll see. You know, that's what I'd love to do.
You're so amazing, Sarah. What are you doing?
Oh, you're amazing, Manny. What you've created at Manny's is extraordinary. To have this space where people come together and talk about the most pressing issues that you're facing as a community in a country, it's awesome. I really am so impressed by you. And you're also just like a singularly lovely and decent and kind human being. So I'm really honored to be part of this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What are you doing for Passover? What's your plan?
Yeah, I got 2 Zoom Seders going. I have my matzah. I'm ready. I'm ready to just do it from my apartment alone. But
I know. Will you be alone too?
Yeah, I'm going to be alone.
Me too.
But on Zoom, you know, it's like, look, I know it's so disappointing to not be able to see your loved ones and do the usual traditions, but it's such, like, now's the time to get creative, right? We're supposed to retell this Passover story of slavery to freedom in our own words. We're supposed to elaborate on it. And we have a chance this year to just really dive into the story and figure out a way to tell it in a totally different format and a totally different kind of venue. And that's kind of a beautiful expression of Jewish tradition, I think. So it's sad and it's hard, but it's also an incredible opportunity.
So thank you so much, Sarah. Before we leave, I do want to just ask people a quick plug to support Manny's. It's joinit.org/o/Manny's. That's the title. That's the link to go to become a sponsor of my small business, which is $36 a month. It's a Jewish number. It's 2 times high. And we could really use your support right now. All small businesses, for the most part, are shut down in San Francisco. So if you have the ability, please consider going to joinit.org/o/Manny's and becoming a sponsor. It would mean a lot to me. It would be a Passover miracle, and I would really appreciate it if we could get some sponsors to help us make it through this time. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy lady. And I also want to thank Sam, our operator, Jupiter and Ram from my team. Please tag us at Welcome to Manny's and share what you learned today, and post on your social media platforms, whatever you use. TikTok us, I guess. And Sarah, what's your social platform link? Do you use social media?
Not great on social media, but I do. It's at Here All Along is my Twitter. And that's like, yeah, that's about where it's not great. I'm not going to lie. It's not really my jam.
Sarah, at Here All Along, tag us at Welcome to Manny's. And everyone, thank you so much. And Sarah, thank you so much for all of the work you do. And thank you so much for all the amazing speeches that you helped write and have written yourself and inspiring so many millions of Americans and beyond. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Manny. Thank you. Be well. Be safe.
Bye.
Bye.